Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you to our presenter today. Thank you to you, Somrita, for coming. We're going to hear from Somrita Urni Ganguli. Did I get it right? Did I pronounce it correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay, yes.
Absolutely, Sylvia.
um, who is currently teaching in India. She is a professor there, and is also a Fulbright Scholar at Brown University, finishing up some work there. So we are incredibly thankful to you for sharing your work with us and sharing poetry and sharing translation and sort of guiding us through a little bit of, I think you're going to do one poem from a work and kind of guiding us through that because it's fascinating stuff. So thank you for doing this and take it away, please.
Thank you so much for having me over, Sylvia. And I'm really happy to be talking to you and to your class. For our discussion today, I've selected an excerpt from a poem called Letter 15. And this is from a collection called Conversations. So Conversations is the English translation of a 5-volume Bangla novel in verse by Purnendu Putri. And this was the first book that I translated. This is for the National Centre for Writing in the UK, and it's finally getting published in India this year. So I do want to start sharing my screen so I can show you the book cover. And we'll talk about the poem from there.
Oh.
So this, as you can see, this is the cover of the 5th volume of the Bangla edition. It says Kathopokathon on the top. Now these verses were conversations between two lovers, and the books were published between 1987 to 1992. Now in letter 15 from book 5, which I will be discussing with you today, Nandini, the girl, is married, and she has just returned to India with her husband, having spent 7 years in Europe, and she reconnects with her old lover, Shubhankar. And once the initial anger, hurt, and hesitation is gone, they rediscover each other once more. So I will share this slide with you. This is an excerpt from letter 15. And so Nandini, in this letter that she writes to her lover, she's thinking about the past, and I'm just going to quickly read a little bit of it. If you can see the screen, I'm going to read the last verse paragraph for you. When tonight dies, it too shall become the past tomorrow. It shall change in no time at all and dissolve into some infinite symbol. A couple of years later, when it is called to testify, I'll see this time wrapped silver in moonshine. But I can't find in this night, in these moments, any signs of the vastness of horizons. Everything is so impervious right now, so unresponsive, like the silent, bitterly black waters of a deep cavity, a well, a hole. I drift in the stillness, alone. On my bed, in my bedroom, the sprained branch of a big tree or a part of its rotting roots. Dressing table, refrigerator, wardrobe, tube light, a bronze figurine of Nataraj, a clay idol of Buddha, terracotta works from Rajasthan, a carpet from Kashmir. I'm surrounded by such illusions. Yet, I'm too foreign for this home. This home is too foreign for me. So here you see the same excerpt in Bangla. And I must also mention that Purnendu Putri, the writer, was also a filmmaker and an illustrator. And all 5 volumes of this book contain his own hand-drawn sketches like the one on your screen now, and also the one that we'd seen earlier on the book cover. Um, so, growing up multilingual in India meant that I was translating all the time without realizing it. Big cities like Calcutta, where I presently stay, these are melting pots of languages, charmed crucibles of various cultures. And I found myself in the heart of it. And an English speaking Bengali girl curious about Hindi music and Urdu literature. So I was always interested in languages. And I've had a fraught relationship with Bangla. It was never my first language, though it should have been. And you could say I arrived at my mother tongue belatedly instead of being born into it. Um, I feel the character of a good poem, of good literature, is that of the sun. Um, it is and it should be for everyone. So, translation is my way of carrying some of the warmth of that sun to corners where the rays can't reach easily. And in my last 3 years as a literary translator, I've translated for people who do not have access to Bangla, but who might just want to read some Sharath Chandra or Purnendu Putri. Translating this work by Purnendu in particular was very interesting for me because there are several things that I had to be careful about. For instance, Bangla is a very soft, emotional language, and as opposed to certain languages that are very masculine, that have a certain roughness to it, and these lovers, Nandini and Shubhankar, are deeply invested in each other, and they're from the 1970s. So their ways of expressing love, their idea of togetherness, passion, desire, and how they talk about it in these letters is distinctly different from how we would talk about it now. And I think people make love in Bangla differently from how, let's say, someone would make love in English or in Hindi or in French. So I had to ensure that I get their tone right. And so these two lovers were emotional for sure, but definitely not sentimental. And I feel at times I had to rescue the text from turning into this soppy middle class Bengali soap opera in the English translation, because there was a risk of veering in that direction. Which is also why I think the act of translation is not just about knowing a pair of languages. It's a little more difficult than we're willing to accept, and one needs to, I think, have a ear for sounds, an eye for detail, and an idea of the context, because we aren't simply translating meanings, but we're also translating the mood of the writing. And we aren't just translating the language, we're trying to translate an entire cultural system. So I want to wrap up by talking about this line in particular from the poem that we just read. I'm too foreign for this home. This home is too foreign for me. And very often, this is how I end up describing my relationship with the Bangla language and my work as a translator. As a principle, when I translate from Bangla into English, I make sure that I do not sacrifice all the kinks and quirks of my language and my culture at the altar of a monolithic idea of English spoken in an Anglophone world. So if we could go back to the excerpt that I read, uh, I think the poem was very rooted in the Bengali cultural context, the cultural context of Calcutta. So I want to take Purnendu Putri to an English reader, but I don't want to turn him English. And sometimes I succeed, at other times I just remind myself that I need to keep trying, because translation, after all, is a practice in acceptance, and we learn to accept over time. I've learned this in the last 3 years, that the translated work will never be equal to the original, because no two language systems are equal. The translation is only going to be equivalent to the text that we are translating from. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and that's what I had to say about
Well,
this work. Sylvia,
it's
if
just so interesting, and first of all, I was struck by a number of things you said, but I was also struck by looking at the language. Bengali, is that? And it, when you talk about it being soft and having a softness, when you look at the characters, they're very circular,
yeah, yes,
and
very rounded,
they're
and
rounded.
even when we talk, we're often making our mouths turn into these O's, because there is that sort of structure even to the sound of that language.
Yes, and in English, things are very guttural and harsh,
Yeah,
and um, trying to go from one to the other has got to be a real challenge. I do some translation from Spanish to English, and although that is a challenge, and as a translator, it's always a challenge, as you said. Um, Somehow it doesn't sound as different, and it doesn't look as different as what you're doing. And I was just really struck by that as well. I was also struck, I love your idea about bringing the sun, the warmth of the sun of the language, to those of us who would never have heard it. I never would have read that, what you brought to us today, had you not been able to give us that warmth, and that beginning understanding of a place and people, um, and a universal of love and of home, and also the difference of love and of home. And what the heck does that mean, either of those two things, in any language, under any circumstance? How do we find home? Where is home? You were saying that Bengali was not your first language, although it should have been. Why wasn't it your first language? What was your first language?
English.
English.
I
Okay.
grew up, yes, and then I grew up monolingual for the first few years of my life, and then I studied Hindi in school as a second language, and I think I taught myself Bangla maybe a decade ago. And a part of it was curiosity, a part of it was guilt, a part of it was shame, because, I had been shamed by a lot of, custodians of Bengali culture for having read, let's say, Tagore in English translations. And
Yeah.
they were like, how can you not read him in the original? So, so I mean, and that's the place where I started from, because I mean, I think this whole idea of the original itself is a little problematic,
Mhm.
because I think everyone has expressed this in some way or another, in some language or another. As human beings, I think we can't lead these sort of insular lives. We're talking about the same things, and we're afraid of the same things. Um, and we're eventually sailing on the same sea. I mean, sure, on different boats. Some
Mhm.
have yachts and some have little
Yeah.
boats, but it's still the same sea. So that's how I got into translation, because I wanted to translate for people like me, who for whom Bangla should have been their mother tongue but wasn't, because they grew up in different places, and so they lost maybe some of the literature that exists in the language. And I thought, what if I can bring this to people? um, because again, like the sun, I think good art is for everyone. It should get to places and warm us.
Has a lot been lost? A lot of
In
the
translation,
No, no, I mean, it, in general, in the literature itself, has a lot over centuries, has a lot been lost, do you think? Just in general, or
I wouldn't say that yet,
okay.
but I think we might be heading in that direction,
Okay.
because for a large population in India now, English is becoming a first language,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the little, local indie presses are really struggling to stay in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And literatures in languages that are not in English are often, facing this competition from English. So I don't think it has been lost yet, because even in this context, Bangla is still a dominant language in India and obviously Bangladesh. So we're still writing a lot, we're still producing a lot, but this is and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad, because sometimes I feel we should all go back to the Tower of Babel, and like all of us should speak one language, so
Well,
we do away with the translation business. And sometimes it looks like English is sort of taking us, hand holding us through our worlds to that situation, to that tower. Um, but on the other hand, because there are so many English speakers now, we are losing some languages in the
yeah.
country, which were earlier spoken by minority groups of people. And so people are really trying to sort of revive them, publish a little more, translate a little more.
Wonderful. And we're all reading a little more in those different languages because we have people like you who are making that accessible to people like me who would never be able to access that. That verse poem sounds fascinating. It sounds wonderful, and I had never heard of it before. So I am just delighted that you brought that to us and that you've taken the time to share that with us, and the translation and the original. So thank you.